For those of you who are watching this today, you probably know what a natural burial is, but you may not. So I'd like to start off with kind of giving you the parameters as to what a natural burial is and what it may mean, and how the Green Burial Council has, helped steward and educate natural burial itself, the whole process. So essentially what a natural burial is an unembalmed body that is placed in the earth in a biodegradable burial container with no outer burial shroud type of like a concrete vault or anything that would inhibit natural decomposition, and it also does not have anything that would be like a concrete footing or upright marker or monument. It's just going back naturally, dust to dust, kind of the way that we've done it for millions of years. So a natural burial can be within a conventional cemetery setting, but most preferably, in a woodland type of setting, to where the body itself could help nurture the environment that surrounds it. So that's what a natural burial is meant to be, and is, if you don't already know that. Why a natural burial is so important, and we'll get into that as we continue this conversation, and why the Green Burial Council's existence is important, is that it helps everyone involved, including the world we live in, spiritually, environmentally, and quite honestly, fiscally as well. Unfortunately, in the life we live in, sometimes we have to talk about the costs of things, and most certainly this is an option that can help families at their time of need, and allow them to do something very meaningful without spending maybe all their savings to do it. So first and foremost, I'd like to introduce the Green Burial Council and what that organization is and what that stands for. So the Green Burial Council is a nonprofit organization that is a national and international organization that oversees the standards that are involved when it comes to natural burials. In 2005, it was founded by a gentleman named Joe Seehey, and its main purpose was to educate the funeral industry as to the benefits of natural burial and to teach them the best practices. And the Green Burial Council has created a certification program that certifies both funeral providers, meaning mortuaries or funeral directors, cemeteries and cemeterians, and products. And what that means is that by educating them to the best practices and by having them make a pledge or a commitment to those practices, in turn, it can protect the consumer and allow these things to be done in a way that people can sleep at night. They don't have to worry about someone maybe doing or saying they're going to do something, thinking that green means something different to them in their mindset. So for instance, with a funeral director, and I'll talk a little bit about what they're offering and why the certification matters for them. A funeral director needs to have a natural burial option on their price list. They have to allow families to participate within the process. They have to be able to handle unembalmed bodies and be able to care for them correctly with refrigeration. And they have to provide natural burial products and have them available for the family, like a burial shroud or a container, in order to become a certified home. So if they can meet all those requirements, they can become certified and they can offer natural burials, and they can use the GBC seal doing so. With a cemetery, so everyone can understand a little bit about what that means. In your mind, you may hear natural burial and you may envision, like I had said, a woodland setting. That's the most ideal setting for a natural burial, but most certainly not the only setting. We have 3 different certifications that are involved with cemeteries themselves. There's the hybrid model, there is the natural model, and there's the conservation model. And the conservation model would be the highest standards that would have to be met, meaning larger burial spaces, more preserved land, would have to have a conservation type of agency or state agency involved in its operation. So that would probably be the hardest one to achieve. There's a lot of different testing and things that need to go into that. And it can be kind of costly, but can create a beautiful atmosphere. A natural burial ground is essentially the same thing, just not allowing or not having a state agency or a conservation agency involved in its operation. It can be run by an individual or an individual corporation or something to that effect, but meeting the same criteria as a conservation burial ground. But the real low-hanging fruit, and what I would like this group to take away from this conversation is the hybrid model. The hybrid model is a conventional cemetery that has embraced the concept and created a section, and they have to deed restrict and dedicate that section for natural burial forever. But the beautiful thing about this is the fact that, if we want this movement to grow, and if we want natural burial grounds and conservation burial grounds to grow, we need to embrace the concept in all of our cemeteries. And as of today, natural burial has always been legal, and it is legal in all 50 states. There is no restrictions concerning that when it comes to the burial of a person naturally in a cemetery. It just comes down to the cemetery's rules and regulations. And unfortunately, a lot of cemeteries adopted traditional rules and regulations over time, requiring vaults and things like that. But they can easily change that. So I do encourage all the listeners here that if you do not have a facility in your location, you really should go speak to the individuals who run the ones that you have, and see if they wouldn't be willing to change their perspective and allow this, because the benefits of a natural burial to not only the facility, but to the families and to the industry are enormous. And I'll touch on that, as we go along. So essentially, the Green Burial Council acts as a steward or the gatekeeper, not only for the consumer, but for the industry. If you are willing to become a part of this organization, that means that you're willing to accept and be and to steward and be part of something that might be a little restrictive, but protects the rights of the consumer. So the consumer realizes that these people have made the utmost commitment to be part of something like this. So that's a little bit about who the Green Burial Council is. In 2011, I do want to touch on this. We did create another organization called the Green Burial Council International. And the reason that was created was that is our educational arm of the organization for the consumer. So that is not industry related. That's to teach people how to do this in a sense, how to grassroots advocacy, I should say, in their communities. So if you don't know a lot about the Green Burial Council, please visit our website, and it's a wonderful resource. You'll find all kinds of information, about natural burial and other things that are involved when it comes to natural burial. What I do want to talk to you about, though, I think is really important today, and what people need to understand is why natural burial is so important, not only to the consumer, to the industry, and to the environment. Quite honestly, natural burial has existed from the dawn of time. We've cared for our loved ones in death for millions of years. It's in our DNA to do so. A lot of people don't realize that, but we've just lost touch with that. Prior to the Civil War, natural burial was what everyone did. You cared for your loved ones in death. They were kept at home. They were buried, possibly in the local churchyard, or even on your own property or in your backyard. So we were in touch with that. And what we did, and what a lot of people don't realize is we chose places that were for the living, meaning that these were beautiful spaces that, would be visited on a daily or weekly basis, to visit our loved ones and feel very proud and respectful when we did so, and to spend time with them, even though they had passed. So it's not something that's new. It's something that's always been there, but since the Civil War, when we were trying to get our sons home, and embalming was introduced as a way to do so that they weren't buried far away from their homes, it created a new industry. And with that industry came products, and with those products came cost and expense. And with other people doing what we were naturally doing on our own, now doing it for us, we lost touch with the ability or the knowledge to do, to care for our loved ones in death. So natural burial really is important in many ways because certainly, the environmental aspect of it is a wonderful benefit, to know that we're having a lighter footprint on our earth, stewarding for future generations. That is vastly important. But to know that we are changing, going back to something very old, something new is taking us back somewhere different, a place where we used to be, and transforming, our society and their thought process when it comes to death and dying. The most important thing that we have to realize is that when we care for our loved ones in life, we do everything we can for them. We feed them, we clothe them, we bathe them. We should be able to do the same in death. And when you're doing those things, it's the ultimate form of respect and the final act of kindness that you can provide to your loved one. It's really important to understand that by doing this, that we have to gain a greater form of acceptance that we won't live forever, and that we will understand that the time will come for us as well. And what would we want for ourselves? And to be able to allow our families to be part of this process, whether it be, bathing or shrouding or spending time with their loved one after they've passed, taking them to the cemetery, bringing them to the grave site, lowering them down, backfilling the grave. This experience is a healing, cathartic process. And many people don't believe that they have the ability to do it, but believe it or not, everyone has the ability to do it. And it's just locked up in a little box in your brain. It's in our DNA to do so. So don't be afraid of it. Embrace the concept. And what'll happen is when you do embrace this concept, you'll find that death is far less scary. You'll realize that, it's just part of, living. And, whether or not you believe in the afterlife or not, you will become something else, when you do die. Your body can nourish the earth. It can go back as it has come, and you can make a difference. And when you are able to experience this in a way that you look at loved ones come in, grief stricken and rightfully so, and then you watch that wash away as they proceed through this. And then at the end of the process itself, you see a genuine smile on their face and they say, thank you. It's not that traditional funeral service doesn't, have people want to thank them for what they've done, because of course they've done a wonderful thing for that family, but it's a different type of experience. You've released something from them. They've gained a greater form of acceptance of that one's passing, and they've celebrated that life while they were involved with that process. So, it's vitally important for us to get back to basics. And as far as the funeral industry is concerned, and I think this might be something that the group might want to understand, this is an enormous opportunity for them. Unfortunately, in life, when people have to make decisions, at these times, it's very difficult. And people make some decisions based upon things that they think are best, and it's probably not the best time to be making these decisions. And when funeral providers offer options to families, sometimes they reap the effects of maybe something that someone wouldn't have done, clear-minded. So the funeral industry has suffered over the years from things like that, where people feel as if they were taken advantage of at their time of need, or possibly, just things like horror movies where people, in our digital age, watch too many things like The Walking Dead, and they just have the impression that people in this industry are weird or strange. They absolutely are not. They most certainly are no different than we are. They care and they do a wonderful service, and they provide the options that are available. So having discussions like this, enlightening and educating, then allows them to be able to have another option and be able to provide that to the consumer. They'll most certainly provide any option that's placed before them if they're able to give it to their families. So why that's important, though, to the industry is that, cremation has become very, 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 popular. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that people don't want to be embalmed, or they don't want the expense of a traditional funeral. So they've kind of chosen something they really didn't want. They just did it because it was a better option for them than what was being offered. And what I'd like to tell this group, and I think you probably already know this, is that our largest customer base now, believe it or not, are cremation converts. As we educate and as people become aware of this option and understand that that it's available to all in all places, they're saying, you know what, I never wanted that to begin with. This is all that I ever wanted, and I would prefer to choose that option. And that's a real big win-win for everybody. That's a win-win for the funeral directors in particular, because now, instead of offering something that didn't feel quite as good as maybe helping a family through the entire process, now they're able to not only offer something that's bringing people back to the funeral home itself, opposed to a direct cremation that obviously the carbon footprint is enormous, but now being able to serve them in a different way. And that's kind of changing or reversing the tide. Funeral homes have been getting shuttered and going to direct cremation rapidly over the years. And now we're putting, this is a stopgap, and it's a wonderful thing to know. And the funeral industry is embracing it. So just remember that the funeral industry is an important part of this puzzle. They're not always needed. Families can do this on their own, certainly in certain states and at certain capacities, but look at them as a friend, not a foe. They're a very big part of what we do. And I can tell you, when they actually perform these services, they fall in love with it, and they would like to do nothing else but natural burial if it was possible. So let's hope that we can continue to grow and have them do nothing but natural burials, or help and assist families that want to do most of it on their own but need some special assistance. So I just wanted to say that that's really important. So we know that that it's important to the environment, because all we have to do is have a shovel, and we can go and we can open a gravesite by hand, and the carbon footprint involved with that is very little. We know we can plant a tree with that gravesite as a living memorial if we wish, and the carbon offset of that living tree could be enormous. It could erase the entire carbon footprint of a life that was lived. So that's a wonderful benefit. As far as the industry is concerned, the funeral directors, we know that this can be a very big boost and a feel-good moment for them and for their families to offer it. It's also a very big opportunity for cemeteries. And why a big part of what we had done with Destination Destiny was that we have reclaimed historic cemeteries that otherwise were kind of thrown away or neglected. And we found new life through natural burial. We were able to take these places that maybe were overgrown or become woodland cemeteries and repurpose them and make them a place for the living, a green recreational space that not only serves the community now, but restores dignity and respect and community. These places are wonderful places of community and history, and every single community possesses one of them. So the opportunities lie out there for natural burial and eco-friendly funeral options to grow. So, and then lastly, I think, I know I wanted to touch, not lastly on the conversation, but on the cost. Natural burial, it can vary. It's like anything else. I think some of you might wonder, what is the cost advantage or disadvantages of a natural burial? So with a natural burial, you can look nationwide, I would say, from what we see at the council, a typical burial plot is somewhere between about $2,000 and $3,500. It really just depends on the location and the facility and what they would like to charge. A grave opening fee, can be as little as nothing if a family would open the gravesite on their own, or between $750 or $1,500 seems to be about an average. So you would say to yourself, well, a direct cremation, and which certainly is not good for the environment, but it's far less. You can get one of those for as little as $1,500. You would say, well, that's a lot more money than a direct cremation. But you have to remember that, with a natural burial, what you're receiving is the celebration and the memorialization and the healing effects, not only for the families, but for the environment itself. And I can tell you this, that, so for a natural burial with an opening, a closing, and a plot probably cost about $5,000 on average. It's never been about that, when it comes to the families and what they want. They are willing to actually spend the extra money to have something more meaningful. So that's really important for everyone to know. And if we speak of a traditional funeral and their costs on a national average, that's a little north of $12,000 now. So a natural burial can be had for about half as much as a traditional, maybe even 3/4 less, depending on the situation, and probably about double of what a direct cremation cost would be. Now, we have some other wonderful options that, Seth will be touching on later today. We love here at the Green Burial Council, we don't certify alternative, eco-friendly, interment options, or like aquamation or natural organic reduction, but we certainly understand the benefits of those. So, those are available to you as well, and Seth will touch on that some more. But overall, this is a win-win for everybody. And how often in life can you ever say that anything, is a win-win for everyone involved? It's a win for the environment, it's a win for the family, and it's a win for the industry, for the funeral industry itself. It's a way for them to recreate and become something different, something a little more meaningful for the communities themselves. So there's nothing that can be said that would be negative about this process. And to create a space that's used by the living, and the final statement in one's life and how they chose to live it for the ones that are interred there, that's beyond special. To go to a place that recreationally serves the community, and serves as a place to respect, those interred there, to be surrounded by life and death, is like nothing else that can be experienced. To hear the wind blowing through the trees, the birds singing, to hear laughter, to want to go and walk those trails and be part of something different, making it part of your daily life. It's really something special and something to behold. I'd like to share a couple personal experiences with everyone before we take some questions, just so we have a good understanding. I always tell people the best advertisement for one of these, and it's a crazy thing to say, is if you've experienced it. No one's ever lucky to experience someone's passing. But if you have been bestowed the opportunity by someone that has chosen this, to go and experience it, the light bulb will go off in your head. Our very first burial at one of my natural burial preserves in New Jersey, was a profound experience for myself. I had an individual who was highly educated, and this is way back in 2007, and a very highly educated individual that had chosen this and had no affiliation nor knowledge, unfortunately, of my facility. Their family had found me, and they had brought them down, and because I did not choose this industry, and it kind of chose me. And if people investigate who I am, you'll see how I got involved. I'm just a regular guy who got involved in this business for family reasons, for a family cemetery. You'll understand that we were looking at doing things differently, just allowing the family to be hands-on and allowing them to guide the process. So as this unfolded, this individual was carried by their loved one, lowered down, and we watched this, and we watched it unfold, and we saw them run the gamut of emotions, happiness, anger, laughter, and we watched it all wash away as they participated. And then we got that genuine, when it was all done, thank you in a way that felt different. That's when I realized I was on a path that would change my life. But during that experience, I looked at the guys who opened that gravesite for me, and when I saw the tears running down their cheeks, for an individual that they didn't know, that told me how absolutely powerful and meaningful it is. And what I would like to say is, that here in the United States, traditional burial practices are traditional to us, since the Civil War. But the majority of the world, is practicing some sort of eco-friendly funeral, internment option or cremation. They've always been doing it. They haven't changed the way they've done it. This is kind of a uniquely thing that goes to the United States when it comes to traditional burial. We have to realize that we have to change things for the better, and we have the opportunity to do so. So we have to embrace that concept, and we have to get people like yourself involved, grassroots style. If there's no voice to be heard, then no one will institute change. So please, listen to what we have to say today. And if you don't have this option available, take it upon yourself to go and ask for it. And if you ask, you will receive. Believe me, it will happen for you. And the one final thing that I'd like to touch upon, this is for everyone. This doesn't have any denomination or any type of religious affiliation or anything attached to it. I can sit here and confidently tell you, we have 12 facilities from the East Coast to the West Coast and now internationally, and we have at the Green Burial Council over 400 providers that are providing this, that this knows no bounds. We have had the distinct pleasure of serving every possible religious affiliation, gender, sexuality, you name it, we've done it. And at the end of the day, we're all human beings, and we all can agree that we can be in the same space and it doesn't matter. I mean, I bury Catholics next to Jewish people, next to Muslims. It doesn't matter. And in death, the irony is no one cares. I've never had an issue. I find it really kind of unbelievable that in life people cannot get along, but in death they don't have a problem with it. So maybe we can all learn a little bit from this. But I could talk for a long time, as you can tell. I think it would probably be best to let Julie maybe take some questions, and maybe I can direct the conversation, to some of the questions you may have.
All right, then we do have some questions. And the first one is, do you have any figures on how much carbon a cremation releases into the environment?
So, that scientifically, I know I've heard different things. I've heard that as much as, and I don't know how any of this, again, I'm not a scientist. I've heard as much as 600, I don't know what 600 pounds of carbon means. I have no idea, so I don't want to misquote anything. I've heard that figure just thrown around recently, but I don't know what that means when it comes to the actual process. So I would encourage you to go to the Green Burial Council website and look at those statistical facts, because I would not want to misquote that.
The next question is, Buddhist end-of-life practice can entail the family's or the community's involvement in preparing the body before burial, cremation, or an alternative. Would the green mortuary come to pick up the body in this state as other mortuaries would?
Absolutely. So what you need to understand is, and I tell this to all my families, there's 4 things that funeral directors provide when it comes to a natural burial. That's permits, transportation, refrigeration, and shrouding and casketing. Any good funeral director that really embraces the concept will do as little or as much as you want. So they will assist with at-home funerals. They will do any of the things that you need or you require. So don't be afraid to ask. And I always tell my families, they just have to ask differently. It's like going into a restaurant and saying, I would just like this and that, nothing else. Some people just hire a funeral director just to procure the permits, because that can be kind of difficult. So they will provide those services for you and assist you in that manner. And if you find a funeral director who says they will not do it, then just pick up the phone and call somebody else, or look for a GBC certified funeral director and they'll help you.
And does the mortuary also provide death certificates?
Absolutely. So that's a really big part of what we do, or not we, but the funeral director or the funeral industry. So I do tell families when they want to do this, keep their loved one at home and even bring them to the cemetery. Because when you're grief stricken, it can be kind of difficult to cope with certain things. Hiring a funeral director to get the permits really is one of the biggest beneficial things you can do, because they know the process and they'll ask you those questions. They know you have to deal with Social Security and different things like that. So typically they'll say, do you want, you probably should get 8 or 9 death certificates, but sometimes they'll advise you more depending on what how you answer their questions.
Can you describe previous Buddhist burial rituals or funerals that you have assisted with?
So, I would only be able to describe it as a layman, or someone who was, standing back and just observing. I had a family come out probably about 10 years ago in in New Jersey. And, you know, I remember walking through that forest, and they were burning, from what my recollection was, they were burning incense, and they were singing very softly some songs. And it was kind of a surreal type of event to witness. It was absolutely beautiful. And, you know, all we were, quite honestly, were witnesses to the actual ceremony itself. So my recollection was, you know, listening to that as it proceeded. And again, I don't know what type of Buddhist, but I do remember, you know, that distinctly. And it was a beautiful experience to witness. You know, I wish I understood a little more about what they were doing, but it certainly was a beautiful experience.
Mm. All right, the next question is, you mentioned that you found that green burial offers a deeper kind of closure for families. Have you communicated with families after the fact? And if so, did they say that a more hands-on process has helped them work with their grief and bereavement?
Absolutely. You know, the unbelievable part of what we do is the greater form of acceptance that everyone has after they actually participate. I have families who they can't speak of it while it's happening, but afterwards are so free. It's almost as if, you know, it just comes out of them. They talk about it. It's a deeply touching experience for them. It brings them closer to the individual that they've lost. They've gained a greater form of acceptance, and believe me, they actually start to preach to other people about the benefits of what this means to them. I could call any family member today that I've ever helped, and I've helped thousands, and they would freely speak to anyone on this call with a private phone call, because that's how profound the experience was for them. So that's a great question, and I'm glad that you asked it. So there's no doubt that it's a life-changing thing.
Mm. Do you notice that more families include children during the green burial process? And what have you witnessed regarding the responses of children that have been included in this process and in the environment?
Absolutely. So, you know, I've had some families where they have felt like maybe it wasn't appropriate for the children to come. And I've always encouraged them to bring the child with them. And boy, I tell you, the children are always steal the show when they come, because, you know, they're so innocent and they don't really have a great understanding of death and dying. And their innocence is what teaches us, you know, how special, you know, this process is, because to them, they're learning something. Their first experience with death is a positive one. And they're teaching others by that, you know, by smiling or saying, you know, where's grandpa, you know, going? Is he going to be a tree? And they're part of the process. You know, they've been part of placing earth into the gravesite. They've helped console others just by their innocence of being there. You know, we have the children many times choose the saplings from our forests when they plant a tree. And that is a real special moment, not only for the child, but for the family itself, to know that they were an active participant. So I'll tell you, man, we love to have kids come out, because it actually, even though it's something that's obviously a very serious affair, but it lightens it in a way that you really feel like, you know, you're closer or connected to the individual that you're laying to rest.
Mm, that's really good to hear, because it has been hidden from children for a long time.
Absolutely.
Does your organization offer tours of the natural burial ground located in the San Francisco Bay Area?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, any of my facilities, people can have private tours. We love to educate. You know, we host people all the time. The Green Burial Council will do the same. You know, meaning they can act as a conduit, you know, to arrange or get you in touch with local providers to you. I mean, every opportunity that we ever have to educate, we seize the moment. So, you know, and if it's not a group, you know, it's individual, you know, because that's really what changes people's perspectives. Because I can tell you this, you know, dealing with a few of my facilities, my personal experience, you know, are close to large metropolitan areas, like, for instance, New York City. And when you get an individual who steps out of a vehicle in a forest in the Pine Barrens of South Jersey, they don't know where they're at, and they really look kind of befuddled. But when you get them out there in that forest, and you get them out there in that silence with nature surrounding them, that is what changes their perspective as to what we're doing. So every opportunity that we ever have to be able to have someone physically there, we will take that opportunity. Absolutely.
Okay, great. You mentioned burying people with trees, but do you also do mushroom spores or other types of methods?
So that's an interesting question. So me personally, at my facilities, we have had individuals who have used products like that. We don't have a restriction against it. As long as it's biodegradable, we'll allow it. The problem that we've had at the council, and I wouldn't say it's a problem, it's just that mycelium and different mushroom spores react differently in different environments. So at the Green Burial Council, with some of these products that we've looked at, we haven't certified, our biggest questions have been, do the mushroom spores work? Is there a negative or a positive effect? You don't ever want to introduce something that possibly is a non-native to a certain environment. So I'm not really sure. I mean, at the council, we've taken the position that we can't certify a product like that without more scientific information. But at private facilities, I would probably say that most would accept, anything that would be biodegradable.
Okay. Are there facilities on site for gatherings following the burial?
Absolutely. I mean, every facility will be different, throughout our network, or even if they're non-network. At my personal facilities, we have open air gathering spaces and we have some indoor gathering spaces. It's really important to create an atmosphere, in my personal opinion, that people can come and enjoy the entire experience at that place. So many of my families, what they'll do is they'll come and they'll actually have their graveside service, and they'll have what would be considered a wake right there. It'll be a picnic, it'll be outdoors, it'll be whatever it may be, but it's a true celebration. And the funny thing about a natural burial, and I probably should say this, is that there's no time constraints. Very, very different than a traditional funeral setting. There is no show up at 9, leave at 9:30. A typical natural burial service lasts probably about an hour and a half, believe it or not. Feels like it's about 10 minutes. Nobody can ever believe that much time has passed. And then they don't want to leave. So we allow them to stay and either set up a chapel with food and photos, or they just, they have an outdoor picnic. So it's a big part of what we do, and it's really something that all operators should encourage.
Can you list the 4 things that funeral directors provide? Permits, transportation, and what were the other 2?
Okay, so I will list that. So with the permits, you're going to need a transportation permit and a burial permit. The funeral director or yourself cannot receive either of those without someone being pronounced. So that's important, okay? And then, of course, Julie had mentioned through another question, they'll get your death certificates. So permits would be burial, transportation. Transportation is also a big one, to and from. They may be picking up your loved one from a hospital or from a home. They may be directly taking them to the cemetery, but you do need a permit to do so, whether it's the funeral director or an individual. Then it would be refrigeration. That's a very big part of what we do. A lot of people will say, and this is a good question, they think natural burial means quick burial. That's not the case. With proper refrigeration, a typical natural burial takes place between 3 and 5 days after someone passes. Of course, if it's from a different faith, like a Jewish or Muslim, typically that's within 24 hours. So dry ice, whatever type of refrigeration they can offer, that's a big part of what we do. Because by law, some bodies have to be embalmed for health and safety reasons if they have not been refrigerated within 48 hours, in some places 24 hours of expiring.
Oh.
And then the one other thing would be the cleansing or washing of the body, the shrouding or the casketing. They can do that. The one thing I always tell my families is, you want this to be a memorable experience. Remember that. There are some things that can be not so memorable when it comes to body preparation. So to have someone guide you through that process can make things far, much more comfortable. But if you would like them to do it entirely, they will, but they will let you participate in that as well. So those are the 4 things you need.
Okay. I have a question, actually. Buddhist tradition may require a body to lay in state for up to 3 days. So with the last statement you made, it seems that that would then suggest that the body would need to be embalmed rather than just refrigerated, because in my own experience, um, the bodies have been picked up and taken to a mortuary where they are refrigerated and held until a cremation can happen.
Oh, no, no, you only need to embalm the body if it was not refrigerated. So if there was no refrigeration between the time they passed away and the 47 hours and 59 minutes, at that point, they would say they were required to embalm the body. So as long as the body, so you have to refrigerate. So a body does not have to be refrigerated for the first 2 days or the first day, depending on the state you're in. But when you reach that threshold, there is a threshold that you have to have the body refrigerated from that point forward. Otherwise, a licensed funeral director would be required to embalm. So you could have your loved one lay in state for 2 full days, for instance, without refrigeration. But when you get to that second day, to the 48th hour, you have to start to provide refrigeration. Otherwise, they would have to be embalmed. As long as they're, what's that?
That was not my experience.
Well,
Or the mortuary didn't tell me that my husband was embalmed.
no, they would,
I had him home for 3 days. It was
did
longer than 48 hours.
did he have any type of refrigeration?
Yeah, we had ice on his body.
That's
That
perfectly fine.
suffices?
Yeah, that suffices.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. This would only be, see, like I tell families all the time, pre-arranging is critically important if you're going to use a funeral director, for them to understand that portion of it. They need to know, because gosh forbid someone were to find out their loved one was embalmed against their wishes because of that dumb, it is a health and safety issue, I suppose, if somebody was not refrigerated for 2 days and it was extremely hot or something to that effect. But as long as you provided that, the ice, dry ice, that's fine. That then you're okay.
Okay, thank you for that clarification, because I know that would affect a lot of people I personally know.
Oh, sure, of course.
The next question is, I live at a Buddhist center where there's a nonprofit organization. How do we start becoming a place where green burial can take place? Are mortuaries open to this kind of partnership?
Absolutely. No, absolutely. If you, that's a pretty big question to answer. I mean, certainly if they have the proper space and the proper designation as a religious facility, that they would be able to probably create a space if environmentally it was available at that location to receive this type of, process. And funeral directors, they work with groups and organizations like that all the time. All you have to do is go to them and say, this is what we would like, and they will create those, something for you to handle that.
Oh, thank you. Earlier you mentioned an area becoming recreational. What did you mean by that?
So this is the thing, whether it's a historic cemetery or a new one, you have to understand that a big part of this process is you want people to come back and enjoy it, visit their loved one, but feel like a place that the living are active. So what we do is, at some of my places, we have walking trails. So for instance, in New Jersey, I have one that's 3 miles long. Out here in California, I have a couple that are a couple miles long. You want the community to come out recreationally, in the sense that maybe they don't have a loved one there at the moment, but they're there to enjoy the facility for what it is, to walk the trails, to pay respects to individuals they don't know, to enjoy the history. It's what it does is it changes the mindset of the individual by bringing the living there, and you're changing how they feel about a cemetery and what the meaning of a cemetery is. So that's what I mean. I have people who ride horses, ride bikes, jog, you name it, and I love to go out there and see the families walk on the trails, knowing that they don't have a loved one there yet, but by visiting, maybe it's changing how they perceive it, and someday they will.
Okay. Next question is, you mentioned that you also work internationally. What countries would that include? I've noticed that the UK has many more natural burial options than we have here. I have always thought that California was on the forefront of alternative approaches, but when I did an internet search, I could only find 3 options in my general Bay Area, all many miles away.
You're absolutely right. I mean, it took a guy from New Jersey to come to California to start a facility because I was burying so many people from California and New Jersey, which made absolutely no sense. So you're correct in that statement. Internationally, we're working with Mexico closely with the Green Burial Council as well. We've got an organization from the Kubler-Ross Foundation that's creating spaces, and they're working on legislation to change laws, to bring it back to the way it once was. That also includes some other countries in South America. We are over in Europe too. I was at the TAN Expo this past June, and part of my mission was not only we have some personal business interest in Italy and other countries, but to educate and get people involved over there, in Europe. And you would be amazed, we probably have a group of about maybe about 30 different individuals that have reached out to us from 30 different countries trying to become part of what we're doing. They're recognizing the importance of being something greater. Canada, we have many, many providers in Canada. So it's available, and people want to be part of this movement.
Okay. Do they allow cremains to be buried in green burial cemeteries? A gathering in the open space of the cemetery is appealing for socially distanced gatherings, even if the deceased chose to be cremated rather than have a natural burial.
That's a very good question. Absolutely, and I'll tell you why and what that means. We're not typically getting people that are choosing cremation and then a natural burial option. A lot of times what we're dealing with are remains of individuals that family members possess, and they want to find a final resting place for that individual. Maybe they would have loved what we're doing, but it wasn't available to them, when they passed. So they memorialize them, with an eco-friendly funeral option, maybe a memorial wreath or a tree. You are correct with the social distance part. Obviously with COVID, we had to deal with that quite a bit, but it didn't stop anything that we were doing. And the one thing I'd like to say to the group is, when it comes to cremation, certainly we know that has a very large carbon footprint and we could do better. But know this, and this is something to ponder. So if you were to take your loved one's cremated remains and you were to plant a tree, and let's say, for instance, it's a white oak tree, and a white oak tree can live for, up to 500 years. What would the impact of that one tree be if it lived to be 500 years? What would the carbon offset be to the carbon footprint of not only the cremation, but the entire life that was lived? If we all chose the option of planting a tree, whether it would be cremated remains or natural burial, we would be making an enormous impact on our environment. So I want to make that point because it's important.
Thank you so much. This will be the last question for now, but there is a request, of course, that both of you list your contact information in the chat box for everyone.
Okay, great.
And thank you so much, Ed. That was really helpful. Lots of great information. And now we'll turn it over to Seth.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Ed. And thanks to the TLC for putting this event together. And thanks for the work that the Green Burial Council is doing. And gosh, those were great questions. I hope that I inspire questions that are half that good. But I think I've got a good chance because the subject matter that I'm going to share with you is there's a chance that this will be the first time that maybe we've discussed it in this level of detail. So I want to share that I just want to give a little background, which discloses that I am not a long-time funeral practitioner. I am a person who was inspired into this field. And I love the way that Ed described that. He said, this industry chose me. And I am I'm definitely in the same situation there, where I was minding my own business back in the 2000 teens, and I experienced the opportunity of sitting with several of my family members as they were dying. And it started with some expected losses in my family. Back in 2013, it was my father's time to die, and that his death occurred following a season of slowly declining health, and he eventually died in his sleep in 2013. But the experience began to soften my heart to this experience and to the significance of the work that's available to us when we bring this awareness of our mortality into our conversations. And I felt in my heart this little spark lighting that really appreciated that sort of the water cooler talk is suspended when we realize that we're dealing with someone that we love so voraciously, and that our time with them is limited. So this experience of presence-based bearing witness to our mortality, it began to really inspire me. And so in 2014, I had an uncle who had a prolonged illness, and I made space in my life to get to sit with him, and he died over a slow period. But what I found was I would go to funeral homes to discuss arrangements, and I left doing the best that I could have done in the moment, but not really satisfied with the options that were made available to me as a consumer. They brought out the same catalog that they had previously, and they said, well, you know, for your grandmother, we did a cloudy sunset on pink sky casket, you know, number 1, 2, 3 ABC from the catalog book. And we selected a weekday visitation for a 2-hour period. And I found that it felt like being served from a menu-driven conversation where the outcome was somewhat predetermined. And this conversation kept happening, first with my dad, then with my uncle. And then in 2015, I had a younger brother who ended his life. And I was back in the same arrangement room with the same funeral director staff, going through the same menu of options and feeling this same disconnect, where I know I need to select something, where it is a very practical matter, and we need to make some choices, but it just didn't resonate as a holistic experience where I really had much of a say. And then in 2016, I experienced a very sudden health event in my own life, where I actually, my family, we thought that I wouldn't survive the event. It was a rupture of an intestine that I mistook for a heart attack, that ultimately led to about 2 weeks in an intensive care center, and then a very long period of rehabilitation. And while I was in this long period of rehabilitation, very unexpectedly, my last 2 remaining elders died suddenly and unexpectedly. And so I was about 3 weeks out of the hospital and trying to recuperate, which meant learning to walk upright. And it was a very significant event that had occurred to me. And it required a long period of rehabilitation and getting back to fitness. And I found myself in this diminished capacity, having just survived a very close to death experience myself. And I found myself back in that same arrangement room with that same funeral director, going through the same menu, asking if I wanted dove on cross 1, 2, 3, or sunset on cloudy sky number 4, 5, 6. And a sense of needing to accomplish my mother's burial, with the tension of realizing there has to be a better way to have this conversation with a family. We had my mother's burial. My mother, back in 2016, was embalmed, was placed in a metal casket, was placed in a vault in a conventional cemetery, and I selected and paid for those arrangements. And so I want to come to you saying that I don't have a long history of saying I've always known the right way to do funeral service. I want to describe myself as a humble new arrival to this industry who's arrived with a spirit of gratitude for the awareness that I now have and inspiration for being a disruptor, whatever that means. And I'd like to be an inspirational disruptor, but I'm willing to be a disruptor of any kind. And so with that background in mind, what I want to tell you is right after my mother's passing, I became the eldest in my family. I'm a family of 9 brothers and sisters. And I already told you one of my brothers died in 2015, but it was a wild experience to be thrust into life from that perspective. And what I did at the time was I owned a very successful business that still exists today. It does industrial and commercial construction of very large spaces and buildings and institutions. It's a multi-state construction company. And I sold my interest in it and I went back to school. And what I decided I was going to do was pursue something to do with end-of-life care. And I thought maybe I'll open up something that's not a hospice facility because that has a medical connotation, but is an end-of-life care facility. And while I was going back to school and having just sold a very large construction firm, I have the experience and expertise to do this. And so I started putting together a blueprint. And I bought the property. I bought 5 acres in Boulder County, and I started to arrange this end-of-life center that would exist on this property where I now live. And in the very last semester of my class, of my studies, I started talking to community, and I said, I have a dilemma, which is that I intend to serve families in a very specific way, with a very intentional goal of meeting their needs without understanding what their needs might even be yet. And so I need to find a funeral home in this area that can serve families after the death has occurred. When I'm handing a family over to a funeral home, I don't want them to experience the same thing that I got 6 times in a row over 4 years from a funeral home that's reading a menu of options to them. And person after person said, oh my goodness, you need to meet this group that's trying to birth this thing in Boulder County called the Natural Funeral. So in my last semester, which was early in 2019, so my timeline, I became an intern at the Natural Funeral in January of 2019. And it was a reluctant internship where basically they said, we're trying to open a business here. We've bought a building. We're having to convert to, make the building ADA accessible, and we can't get a certificate of occupancy. And all of our focus is not on family care yet. It's on just trying to get our building open. And so I persuaded them by saying, well, I'm a Class A licensed general contractor in this state, and I'm coming into this industry with a long history of commercial and industrial professional construction. And so the trade was they'd let me see how they're going to serve families if I helped get across the finish line. And I'm real happy to say that in just about 3 weeks, We had a certificate of occupancy. The natural funeral had a big grand opening on March the 1st of 2019. We knocked all the roadblocks out of the way and had the big grand opening. And on March the 30th, the two founders asked me to join them as a full partner. And so what my wife and family and I did is we paused our dream of building this end of life center. We still live on the property where we'll maybe someday build this, but what we found is that we fell in love with being with families at this conversation. And that conversation that I've had myself so uncomfortably so many times, I now get to reinvent with families. And I get to ask them about what's important to them. And I get to do it without a prescription of a menu that I have to overlay. And I get to do it with a prayerful heart that has a prejudice toward every family that I serve. Every family that comes in the natural funeral, I want what you want at least as bad as you want it. And I'm armed with the laws and a funeral home and the transportation vehicles and a team that's going to advocate for you. So because of that, we have what I would consider to be maybe the broadest menu of any funeral home I've ever heard of. And to that end, we do green burials. We do some vaulted burials. If families come to us and they already own a grave in a cemetery that doesn't allow for something as green as we would like, we take them up to the greenest limit that we can, and we work with them in their environment. We do flame cremations for certain families who have a spiritual preference toward a flame cremation, or maybe an economic preference toward a flame cremation. So we're not discriminating and taking that option off the table, even though it comparatively has a more significant impact on a carbon budget. But where things get really exciting is that a lot of families come to us for the items that are innovative and that other funeral homes aren't offering. So to that end, I'm going to share my screen, and I want to talk through some of these other options. So Ed, I see you on my camera. Can you give me a thumbs up if you can see the screen? Okay, good. So this slide that you're seeing here is myself and one of my partners named Karen Van Buren, and we're sitting in the parlor of our funeral home, the Natural Funeral, which is located in Lafayette, Colorado, in Boulder County. And there's a lot to see in this picture, but the couple of things that I want to point out to you that are different from other funeral homes is that, well, there are a lot. One, there's a table where we serve tea that sits between us and the families that we're meeting with. There's not a desk. There's no separation barrier. There are smiles on our faces and songs in our hearts, because that's the energy that we're going to choose to connect with families in. We've got porcelain china that belonged to my mother, and before it belonged to my mother, it was my grandmother's, and that's what we serve tea to the families that we meet with. The urns behind us are made by artists that live less than 30 miles from where the Natural Funeral sits. The ceramicist, the turned wood. Our caskets are made about 10 miles up the road. They're made at the time of need, measured to the dimension of the decedent's body so that there's not waste. You'll notice Karen and I are wearing light and natural colors. We don't wear black or dark colors at the funeral home. We don't greet people at the door and say, "I'm sorry for your loss." I don't know them and I haven't earned that right yet. So we greet people with a spirit of gratitude for them engaging with us and for what's about to proceed in terms of coming into community with that person. So I just wanted to show you that it's how it looks and feels when you come into an airy, even the walls we chose to make a cream color rather than any dark color. Everything about the center is very intentionally designed. Ed just spoke magnificently about green burials, and so I'm not going to dwell at all on that topic. In fact, I learned some new things in that conversation, but I do want to just show, this is an example of what a green burial looks like. This is a burial that the Natural Funeral performed. And I also want to acknowledge and reiterate a challenge that Ed issued to all of you on this call. Where this green burial is taking place is in an old municipal cemetery in the town of Lyons, Colorado. And Lyons is a little bitty town in between Boulder and Estes Park, which is the foothills to Rocky Mountain National Park. And it has been a conventional cemetery. And I'm going to use the term conventional when I talk about the modern practice of burial or the modern establishment of a funeral home. We call the people that aren't doing it our style or Ed's style, we call that the conventional industry rather than the traditional practice, because we think what we're doing and what Ed is doing is the traditional practice. Because if you go back to the pre-Civil War era, this is how it was done. There wasn't a funeral director to facilitate the opening and closing of a grave. There wasn't a casket maker. There weren't pallbearers offered as a menu on a line item, and there certainly weren't Cadillac hearses. The family and community took care of the burial, and that's what we invite families to come back into. And I also want to reiterate that in my experience, everything tactile that we can give to a family, whether that is inviting them to wash the body of their loved one who has died with us, whether it's inviting them to participate in the closing of the shroud, carrying the in this case, a willow carrier by the handle, lowering that through a rope, and letting that rope somewhat, you can feel that twine in your hand as you're lowering the body of someone. Every tactile experience we can offer a family is another opportunity for a spark of recognition and healing to light in the heart of someone. So just a brief picture, and now I'm going to move forward. This is another picture. This is actually last week, and this is in the Lyons Cemetery. So what I want to share with you, this cemetery has operated since the 1880s. And in 2020, we went to the cemetery and we said, it's beautiful and we'd love to bury people here, but we don't have any interest in making people buy 18 gauge copper caskets or steel reinforced burial vaults. And so we're going to avoid the cemetery as long as that's a regulation. But if it could somehow not be a requirement anymore, we'd be delighted to refer to you and even buy a corner of the cemetery. So what we've originally done is secured 40 plots with options for 400 additional plots. And we purchased the whole entryway to the Lyons Municipal Cemetery. And an amazing thing happened when they met with the board of directors to get approval for this new method of burial, is that the modern board of directors couldn't remember why those policies were put in place to begin with. And so not only did they remove that restriction from our part of the cemetery, they removed that restriction from the whole cemetery. And most funeral homes who've been working in this cemetery for some of them 100 years, they'll continue to have a vaulted and casketed and embalmed burial. So this is very much a hybrid cemetery. But some of those funeral homes now have the flexibility of not requiring families to choose those options. So I just want to piggyback on Ed's inspiration or encouragement for you to talk to the cemeteries in your area, because if the option doesn't exist yet, maybe they could make an exception for you and your group of people, but maybe they'll just shift their perspective and actually change the requirement in the whole place. So this is the Lyons Cemetery, and this is what it looks like when we do a green burial there. I want to share with you, because I mentioned that we've got a pretty broad menu. We have had families who've come to us and asked for help with outdoor pyre cremations, which this is a photo of one that we recently facilitated. This was actually in between two very notorious and horrific fires that occurred in Boulder County earlier this year. And as long as there's not a burn restriction in place, we know the right people to work with. And so I just wanted to share that private land pyres are something that we help families with, and also private land burials. So very natural burials on people's private property. Okay, the two main technologies that I want to talk with you about are pretty exciting, because Ed shared with you that there's been a funeral industry in the United States basically since the Civil War. That was the genesis to our industry. And it's an industry that's not letting go of the capitalized and commodified things that it has available to sell and offer to the public. So it's an old industry, whether you look at it from its commodified perspective since the Civil War, or it's an old practice if you just look at it from the history of Homo sapiens, who have taken care of and buried our dead. And there are some newly technological options that, because they do have a quantifiable impact on the environment that is far less than some of our modern practices, they're piquing a lot of interest. The first one I'm going to share with you about is called alkaline hydrolysis. That's the scientific term. We call it water cremation. We call it water cremation because we talk in simple terms, and we're not trying to use euphemisms to paint out of the room the reality of the situation that is before us. So, like when we talk to clients, we try to avoid terms like that your person has passed away, and we use direct terms like your loved one has died, and now these are the next steps that we're going to take. And similarly, if I tell a client, especially a bereaved person, oh, would you like to choose alkaline hydrolysis? Well, there's no one on planet Earth that's not in the funeral industry who that makes sense to. And so we try and just talk to people in plain, comprehensible terms. So water cremation is a process of chemistry. And I'm going to get into this not as though I'm having a conversation with a bereaved, but I'm going to get into it in a very plain English conversation that describes more of the science of this than its emotional overlay to a family's needs. So with that caveat in mind, alkaline hydrolysis performs a dissolution of the body, which is to say that in this vessel, you'll see on the right of the screen there, the silver vessel is about the size and shape of a bathtub. It's about 2 feet wide and about 2 feet deep by about 6.5 or 7 feet long. And we place the decedent's body into that stainless steel vessel. You'll notice on this end that there's a rocker arm, a hydraulic. There's another one on the other end of the equipment. And you'll notice that there are tubes and exhaust and pipes running to the vessel. And you'll notice on the left of the screen, a computer screen where we program the inputs in regarding each decedent for this process. But in a nutshell, in about 3 hours time, after the decedent is placed into the vessel weighs the body weight of the decedent, then adds 12 gallons of warm water, and then it adds 2 chemicals at this stage of the process. The 2 chemicals that are added are potassium hydroxide and denatured alcohol. The potassium hydroxide is a basic or alkaline chemical, which when we use it, this process is taking place at a pH of nearly 14. So about the highest measurable, quantifiable pH. And it is that basic or alkaline mixture combined with the movement of the vessel. And so this vessel, the hydraulic arm, I'm pointing at my computer screen as though that's helpful to you on the call. I apologize. But the hydraulic rocker on the end of the vessel here operates in about a 15-second timer, where the vessel, which is horizontal, rocks 3 degrees down one direction, and 15 seconds later, it rocks 3 degrees down the other direction. And that process of rocking with the 12 gallons of water that we've added to the body, and then several pounds of the potassium hydroxide and denatured alcohol, begins to form a wave flow across the body. And that wave flow operates in a lemniscate pattern, and over the course of about 3 to 4 hours, depending on the weight of the decedent, at the end of that time, there are only 3 things that remain in the vessel. And those 3 things very specifically are the bones of the decedent, which we remove from the vessel. We use a screen and we take those bones out. We dry them through a slow dehumidification process. The drying process is a 24-hour slow dry that takes place with a gentle airflow and about 160 degrees of temperature. And we dry the bones. We reduce them in a machine called a cremulator. It's the exact same machine that's used in a fire cremation. We make the bones into a powder and we return them to families so that they can be memorialized or scattered as cremains. So that's one thing that's left in the vessel and what we do with it. Another thing that's left in the vessel is anything inorganic that was in the body. So, for example, a pacemaker. It doesn't have to be surgically removed before this process. It's just going to be down in the liquid with the bone at the end of the process. A prosthetic knee or shoulder, anything that's ever been surgically implanted into the body, a breast implants, stents or aorta stents that have been used surgically, anything plastic or metal, battery operated, silicone, anything is going to survive this process. And we take all of those things and we send them for medical recycling. So rather than incinerating the metal, or rather than having to surgically take a pacemaker out because it would explode in a flame retort, we can put the body in as is, and then we can recycle the inorganics. And an important part to include here is that includes teeth. And why that's so important is because in a flame cremation or in a burial, any mercury that would be in our teeth amalgams is gonna either be incinerated in a flame cremation, or eventually it's just gonna go back into the earth in a burial. But this process allows that mercury, which is pollutant and which is damaging to our ozone layer when off-gassed, it allows that to be captured and dentally, medically recycled. So the third thing that's in the vessel, along with the bones and along with anything inorganic, is the liquid. And the liquid is what has become of our soft tissue, the soft tissue part of our body. And what's really amazing about this liquid is that we add a third chemical to this liquid to neutralize it, or to bring it back to a pH of 7, which is neither basic nor acidic. And when we use this third chemical, and I'll tell you what it is, we use glacial acetic acid is our third chemical. And if you've ever heard of acetic acid, if you were to look at the ingredients of a bottle of table vinegar, it would be acetic acid, 8 to 15% diluted, right? So we use it non-diluted. We use a completely sterile and whole glacial acetic acid, which would be non-diluted table vinegar. And we use that to neutralize the pH down to 7. And once that is done, this liquid is completely sterile. It's completely pathogen-free. It is devoid of anything which could be measured as DNA, anything that could be measured as life. The process of chemistry has made this a completely sterile liquid or effluent. But because it is sterile and because it is elementally nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, calcium, magnesium, boron, any element that we've ever built into our body is now available in a sterile liquid biostimulant, which means that when diluted to the right ratio, that those elements can be available for plants to uptake to build their plant bodies. So this is a gift of a body that can be reintroduced back to the earth. And it's very important to know that not all water cremation processes are the same. There are alkaline hydrolysis or water cremation is legal in 23 states in the United States. Most of those systems that are deployed in the 25 or so water cremation facilities that I know of use a different hardware, and a lot of times they take the liquid, the third part of what's left in the vessel, and it is sent to public wastewater treatment for recycling and sterilization and put back into the municipal water supply. So I'm presenting that fact very neutrally. I do not have an opinion whether that is good or bad. I do know that it takes our body and it puts it back into a water cycle that will eventually be reused. I am not neutral. I do have a preference for our technique, which is that we put that liquid into a single reservoir and we offer any amount of that liquid essence back to the family. And if families choose to take some of that back, and I would tell you the most common request is for about 8 ounces of the liquid biostimulant back, then we give them application instructions. They go home, they dilute it, they put it in their yard or garden or however they want to use it. Most people choose to donate that liquid essence, and we have a network of farms that started out in our little Boulder County, and it moved to Denver, and now it's moved as far as we have farms in Kansas that come and it's all donation based, donation from the family to us, and a donation from the natural funeral to farms, that this biostimulant is given back to the earth. And most farms are using it to reestablish land that's been overgrazed, pastures that have been depleted, or on grasslands where primarily clover, alfalfa, or brome grass is being cultivated, or they use it in another way agriculturally. But that's in a nutshell. I'm going to look at my notes and make sure I haven't left out anything I really wanted to make sure I covered on alkaline hydrolysis. Yeah, I think I do want to point out that compared to the process of a flame cremation, that alkaline hydrolysis uses fewer than 10% of the energy. There's no natural gas consumed, obviously, and there's zero pollution. So there's no chimney, there's no smokestack. Everything is contained in that vessel and will eventually be either given back to the family, medically recycled, or given back to the earth as a biostimulant. Let's see. I'm going to move on to the next topic, which is we call body composting. You'll hear it regulated as either natural organic reduction or the state of Colorado, where I usually am. That's not where I am today, but where I usually am and where the natural funeral is in Colorado. And the state of Colorado regulates this as natural reduction. They left out the term organic, which I'm a fan of the way that Colorado chose to describe this. But I want to give you a brief history of natural reduction or body composting. And so, first of all, I would say that all human composting it stands on the technology of agricultural composting. So for a very long time, agricultural mortalities, think any livestock that is raised commercially or even on private farms in the United States. A way that we have dealt with those mortalities for years and years is through animal composting. And that's usually done in what's called pile or row composting, which are generally outdoor techniques where they're not contained in a certain vessel. But for the purposes of regulating body composting, one thing that all states which have currently legalized this process, which are currently in order, Washington State, then Colorado, then Oregon, then Vermont has legalized. And those are the places that I know of where currently laws are enacted to enable this process to take place. They all require that it take place in a vessel. And so what I further did is got to reach out to the community. So I've gotten to meet and to know the pioneers at Recompose through Katrina Spade's organization, which was at the forefront of this in Washington State, through the Herland Forest, which is of course Walt's organization, Walt Patrick's organization, in South Central Washington State, and then also gotten to know and visit the folks at Return Home, which is an organization where Micah Truman is at the helm. And we observed everyone's best practices and then came to Colorado to implement our technique, which is sort of uses the best and the most beautiful concepts that we've derived from the industries of animal and mortality composting. And then as the early pioneers have started to do this in Washington State. So to move the timeline forward, this became legal in Colorado on September the 7th of 2021. So it's not quite a year yet that this has been legal in Colorado, but 15 days following it becoming a legal option in Colorado, we laid in the first person into this vessel that I'm leaning on in this photo here. And our vessels have since evolved. This particular vessel has since, it has its third decedent in it today. And so we're using a mixture of sort of these preliminary vessels that we began working with. I'm going to move the slide forward and show you this was the laying in. This was the day of the laying in of that first person on September the 15th, 2021. And in this picture, what I want to draw your attention to is that this is a very simple process. The vessel is sealed, and by that, what I mean is we're controlling moisture in or out, we're controlling airflow in or out, and we are very much controlling what's going in the vessel. We surround the body with wood chips, straw, and alfalfa. So wood chips, straw, and alfalfa, and then we lay in the decedent, and we invite families to bring in up to a shoebox size of material, any green material. People have brought in hops, they've brought in branches from trees, spruce trees that they planted in their yard together that are now 50 feet tall, and they'll take a clipping and bring that to maybe put in with their loved one. Flowers, notes written on biodegradable paper. And then with the family present, we invite them to put straw over the top of their loved one. And then with the family there, we close the lid of the vessel. I will share that there's one additional step, and I think it's important to mention because there was a question about the usefulness of fungi and bacteria. The last thing that we add, and we don't do it with the family present, but we put in 4 gallons of a tea that we have brewed. It's a biodynamic tea that is very rich in very particular strains of bacteria and very specific spores and varieties of fungi. And that tea brews, and we add that over the mixture of the bulking agents surrounding the loved one's body. And then we close that. And what I'll share with you that happens next is over about the next 3 months, this vessel is going to heat internally as compost piles do when the reaction is occurring of decomposition. The vessel, the internal temperature heats, it gets pretty hot pretty quick. And the state of Colorado has chosen, they've mimicked the agricultural composting law. And the requirement is that the internal temperature of the vessel meet or exceed 131 degrees Fahrenheit for at least 72 contiguous hours. And we have chosen internally to at least triple that requirement. So we take the vessel through 3 full heat cycles, and our heat cycles are generally as short as 3 or 4 days, and they can be as long as 12 or 14 days in the first heat cycle when a lot of composting is happening inside that vessel. So the slide I'm showing you here, this is in an area where we bring families for laying ins into the vessel. And we've evolved our model a bit where now we have a pod that we can lift in and out of each of these vessels so that the outside of the vessel can be this beautiful beetle-killed pine wood, but we have a reusable pod that we can take in, lower in and out of the top of that vessel. But the vessel design is quite simple, and this is the area where we offer layings in with families. This is the last pictorial slide that I have, but this just shows we've also started to take these vessels off site. So this is at a facility, maybe, I don't know, 30 miles from our crematory, where the family wanted to have a laying in outdoors. And so this is beneath a willow tree. We laid in a loved one here. The family participated with an outdoor ceremony, and then we closed the lid and transported this vessel, which we call a chrysalis, back to our crematory. Yeah, I want to look. It looks like there are about 17 minutes left. So rather than trying to force information into that time, I'd love to give space for any questions, and I'm happy to be really transparent with any information. So I'm gonna stop my screen share and invite Julie maybe to help us to go through any questions that there may be.
One person wanted to hear about recompose, but I believe that you've covered that to some extent. And is there any other comment you might have about recompose in particular?
Sure. Well, what I would say, Recompose is Katrina Spade's organization. She began, I would say she's really responsible for pioneering the early energy of acceptance of human composting. And she did that through a program called the Urban Death Project when she was an architecture student. Katrina's a friend and a wonderful a pioneer in this industry. I will say that their organization does things a little bit differently than we do. Again, no judgment on anyone's process, but their technique is a little bit dissimilar from ours, especially in terms of the time frame. Like I believe that their organization describes this as a 60-day process, where we talk to families in terms of a 4-month process, and we believe that it just enhances the quality of the outcome of the living soil in this biological process. But no, they're currently located in Seattle, and I know that there is or the Seattle metro area, and I know that there are plans to come into additional states. I know that they're coming to Colorado. I'm excited about that. Yeah, and I know that the Natural Funeral has plans to operate in many states as well. So I think they're a growing organization like we are.
Okay. Next question is, Can the bones that remain after the process of alkaline hydrolysis or water cremation be returned to the family? Or is it a legal requirement to crush them into an ash-like substance beforehand?
Yeah.
If the bones can be kept intact, this could be used for a particular Vajrayana Buddhist end-of-life ritual.
Yeah. Where we get into a legal situation is that the requirement for cremains is the same, whether it's a water cremation process or a natural reduction process for that matter, or a water cremation or flame cremation, is that the anything returned to the family may not be distinguishable as human remains. And that's the whole reason why even flame cremains are pulverized into a powder. And the reason for that, as you might imagine, is that police and investigators don't want to stumble onto a skull or a femur or something and have a need for an investigation regarding this dead human remains, right? So the reason for the law isn't specific to any disposition type. It's specific to law enforcement really not wanting to investigate body parts that are not a crime.
Okay, thank you. Another question. I didn't know open air pyre cremation was permissible in Colorado other than in the town of Crestone. It's wonderful that you got to help a family in this way. Who would we check with to see if it's okay in our state?
That's a great question. So I'll tell you, there are two formal sites that do outdoor open pyres in Colorado. And one is the Kelp or the Crestone End of Life Project in their location. And that's only open to residents of Saguache County to use that outdoor pyre. And there's another spot at Red Feather Lakes in Colorado, which is operated by the Shambhala Buddhist group, and they have an outdoor permanent pyre at their facility. And it is legal to be done in Colorado on land that is zoned agricultural or forestry land. And certain setbacks need to be accommodated. And certainly the most important thing to do is to contact the fire jurisdiction in the area, to make sure there are no burn bans, and to make sure that they're aware that this activity is going to occur. And in our case, what we do is when we submit that notification, we submit it along with an action plan for fire mitigation. And in our case, because we have this on our menu, on our broad menu, includes open air pyre cremation. And that includes us bringing multiple water reservoirs where we have multiple charged or water pressurized lines coming from multiple directions, where teams can access the site in case any fire were to get out of control. So we approach the regulators already with a site plan, if you will. And what I would recommend to find out if this is acceptable in your area is to run it up the flagpole, maybe even hypothetically, maybe even say, we don't have someone who's currently died, but we want to know the regulation. And you might bring to them a hypothetical address, but one that really exists within your community. You know, who has a farmland where we might carry this practice out someday? And then take an address and say, hey, we found this 80-acre parcel where we have, a natural water where we can mitigate fires. I would just recommend taking them a hypothetical situation and making them press back. And if they press back, they're going to have to cite a law or a reason. And if they say, well, we're currently under a fire burn restriction, okay, what about someday when we're not? What would preclude us at that time? What would you want to see in our site plan? I will tell you that we have a lot more families approach us about an open air pyre than actually go through with it, because there are a lot of hoops to jump through, and a fire marshal can shut this down at the snap of a finger. I mean, if If we move from a green condition to a yellow or red fire condition, they'll just shut the whole thing down. So you want to be ready with a backup plan, but that's it. That's my advice.
Okay. Can you give an estimate about the cost of water cremation and also US locations where this can be done?
Yeah. Our water cremation costs $3,900, the natural funeral. And that includes all of the services that Ed described. Like when you're looking for a funeral home, you need them to provide death certificates and transport and mechanical refrigeration or dry ice refrigeration. You need them to get your permits for the disposition options. So all of the prices I'm going to tell you include all of those things. But our cost for water cremation is $3,900. Our cost for body composting is $7,900. Our cost for green burial is $3,200 plus the plot. And just for comparison purposes, I want to tell you our cost for flame cremation is $2,400.
Thank you. That's helpful to a lot of people, I'm sure. Then the next question is, how about electric cremation instead of gas cremation? Do you consider that a green option, and are they common in the US?
I haven't experienced that yet. I'm open to all things green and solar powered and renewable energy accessible, but I'm not an expert that could speak to the electric cremation.
Okay. Well, that's the end of our questions, and we thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for your work in the world, and go out there and brighten everyone's light.